should be quite quick. Test.
I made my recommendation. They went by the way, and you were like, okay, guys. And also the one person you had runs the whole criminal process. No one. So okay. Rather than being net neutral, net down. So net down I've rarely seen hiring systems go with poorly. Wow. So otherwise I'm good, yeah. I'm like literally on my last day. So now but with some Nancy Free. You know fun. No, I think everything's back up. And it's like I did it. That's true. I get you back. So you good. You've got one of those faces that you use way better than you have. So, I will go on. No, I wasn't going to get the drink. I was just going to move some.
Hello, hello.
This is on.
Oh, it is on.
Hello, everyone. Ooh, that is loud. You don't need to rush to your seats, but we're going to start in about 5 minutes. So if you just slowly, quickly start making your way into the many very comfy seats we have set up. I'd just like to say there's a bunch of really good seats right up here at the front, and if they're still empty in a second, I'm just going to pick on random people I know to come and fill them. So I suggest that if you feel like you might be the type of person that I would pick on, you should just proactively move at this point and come. Well, there we go. Alan and Jeff know the deal. Connor's leaving the front row. He was worried about getting bullied, and he's put his bag down and he's just walking off. I'm going to wait for the last stragglers. For people who are watching on YouTube, if you can see me and not hear me, or hear me and not see me, just post in the Slack thread and I will endeavor to fix it once I get off stage. All right, you've all called me on my bluff, and I'm not going to pick on any of you to come sit in the front row, but thank you to the four that have. All right, we will kick off. First off, thank you everyone for being here. For anyone that I haven't had the chance to meet yet, my name's Dylan Baker. I'm a freelance analytics consultant, and I've been the organizer of the London DBT Meetup, of which this is the third one. Thank you. That's not. Thank you. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming out. Appreciate evenings are precious, and glad that you're here to take part in this. We've got two really awesome talks, if I do say so. Or I think so. We're going to have Matthew Ferry from RVU come up and talk about how not to talk about DBT, talk a bit about their experience at RVU and in rolling out DBT and the do's and don'ts and all that stuff. And then we've got Alan Cruikshank from Tails.com, who are quite far along in their DBT deployment story, and is going to come up and talk about a whole range of things and basically talk about whatever the hell you want. I think there's a level of audience engagement in that one, and I have no doubt that he's very capable of navigating a story that will be to all of your taste. And that's it really for the moment. So without further ado, Matthew, I will hand over to you. Yeah, there we go.
Hello, my name is Matthew Ferry. I am from RVU. It is just an acronym. It doesn't actually stand for anything, so I apologize if you were wondering. I'm the data product manager for RVU, and so that is a role that is pretty new to us. We just established a data team. We have a head of data and analytics, myself as a data product manager, and we're actively looking for data engineers. So if you were one of those, come see me after the show. So today I want to talk to you about how not to talk about DBT. And this is something that we've learned through a series of months of just figuring out, I guess, how to talk about it, and then realizing that we weren't doing it right. So essentially, before I get into that, I did actually have a thing. So when I was in university, I took a class on financial derivatives. And as part of that class, you're supposed to trade a portfolio for the entirety of the semester. But every class, I learned something that scared me so badly about the stock market that I only ever made one trade in the entirety of the semester. And then at the end, I had to write a 10-page paper about that portfolio. And this presentation feels a little bit like that paper in the sense of we've been working on this since the first DBT meetup, and we're still working on our first team. And I think that's an important thing to talk about. I don't think that we tend to talk about places where we haven't been a wild success, and so that's kind of what I want to share with you today. So a little bit of background about RVU. Our RVU is the team behind three pretty popular, or we hope very popular websites. Last month we saw about 5 million users across our three websites, the first of which is USwitch, probably the one that you're most likely to hear of. We are an energy comparison website that also does comparisons for all sorts of home services and financial services, such as broadband or mobile phone deals. And our second website is money.co.uk. This is primarily a comparison site also for financial services. And then thirdly, we also have a third brand that we're bringing over from the US called Bankrate. So bankrate.com is a big player in the mortgage space. And we're trying to kind of change the way that customers are engaging with the mortgage getting process. So those are our three websites, and we're trying to pull all kinds of data from all these different users and put that into one place. So how do we do that? We're using a bunch of sort of off-the-shelf tools to do some of those things, as well as things that we've built internally. So just to walk you through this, like we're primarily trying to think about the performance of this website and how it's serving our customers. So we're going to need to understand both their behavior on site and the sort of event data that comes out of that, which we get through Google Analytics and more recently through Segment. And then also the paid and earned media performance that we're pulling in from like AdWords, Twitter, Facebook, any of those other sources. And so for that, we're using a company called Fivetran that will allow us to just pull that data straight from the API and dump it into BigQuery, which is our data warehouse. But that's not the only information that we're interested in about our business. So there's lots of internal databases that we're going to need to take information out of and then replicate it into the same place as this very juicy up funnel and middle of funnel data. So for transitioning that data out of internal databases and into BigQuery, we have two different tools that we're using. One is called Beetle. It's an internally built tool that is essentially a command line tool built in Haskell that allows you to use SQL and YAML files to define the transformations of your data. Sounds a little bit like DBT, but we'll get to that in a minute. The second thing that we're also using is Databricks for a couple of our processes. Databricks is a hosted, a managed Spark platform for doing all kinds of Scala and Python-based transformations. So with that, it's probably worth talking about the team structure a little bit so you can get a background for what we're about to talk through. Essentially, we've got roughly 5 different teams. That might be a simplification, but we're thinking about our teams in terms of the products that we're serving to users, and not really as much about those 3 different brands that we talked about. So each team is cross-functional, including a marketing team, a product team, an engineering team, and an analytics team, as well as a commercial team, commercial team, I just forgot to put that on the slide. It's true. And across all of those teams, each of them has their own analyst team, ranging from 1 to 6 analysts, and the total comes in at about 16, I think. So all of these teams have some element of their reporting coming through BigQuery, but not necessarily all of it. I think energy is the one that has the least of their data through BigQuery, but then the rest of it is coming in through nearly all or most or all of their reports. In addition to this sort of SQL-based world, we don't really have a BI tool that's sitting on top of this that's like giving self-service data so much as we have Tableau, where our analysts are creating dashboards for business users to come in and pull data, analyze data, find trends, all that sort of thing. So within this, we've got about 130 registered users to Tableau. I can't guarantee that all of them are actually looking at it, but that is the number that we've got. So that gives you hopefully roughly a scope of maybe 10% of our business is analysts, and they're the ones who are going to be using SQL. The rest of our business is going to be a little bit less SQL-based, and it's primarily going to be using Tableau and these data sets and potentially spreadsheets. So, but within these analyst teams, we have one of what I think Fishtown Analytics would call an analytics engineer. If you're not familiar with the term of analytics engineer, it's essentially an analyst who has moved towards the curation of data and tried to adapt software engineering best practices to the way that they do that. And so each one of these teams has at least one analyst who has experience with a command line, has experience with Git, really knows their SQL and knows the data behind their business and can transform it appropriately. And they also know how to use this tool internally called Beetle, which is essentially using these YAML files to define the order of transformations and the SQL to define the transformation that they're doing. So you would think that that sets you up really, really well to just say, like, let's pull that thing out, swap in DBT, and we'll do all the transformations that happen within BigQuery. And you would think, like, oh yeah, perfect, done, deal, we're going to go home. Actually, it's not quite that easy. So there is some additional technical knowledge that you need as an analyst to understand, like the Jinja SQL and the templating and the modular components and how to really architect that system. And I think we did initially see some pushback from engineers who were like, well, I think we're going to have to teach people a lot about how to construct these modular components and how they should fit together. And I don't think that, honestly, we've even gotten to the point where I have a great story for you about how we've done that. But I think where we are right now is saying, like, oh, okay, theoretically, it's not so much a technical skill gap to get started, at least with understanding what the tool does and what it's trying to do. But there's something else that's sort of preventing us from going. Maybe it's a lack of knowledge. Maybe people haven't seen this thing. So the way that we decided to go about this was, let's find one place that's really good for us, or really important, or doesn't really have a lot of data set up, and we'll go do a proof of concept there. And so that's what we did. We started out with our SEO team, which you remember only had one analyst, but also a really important part of our business, considering that all of our users are coming to our website. That's really the only way that we continue to have a nice building like this and can host DBT meetups and make cookies. So the thought behind this was, let's kind of launch this big effort in SEO. We'll curate a bunch of their data. We'll embed somebody who is familiar with DBT, and we'll kind of build out this proof of concept. But the thing is, as soon as you sign on to doing a very important and big project, big and important projects always have deadlines. And there's always something that is going to come up where you need to make sure that you get this done fast. And the nice thing about using DBT was, yes, we did hit all of those deadlines. We were able to make the reporting that we needed. We were able to grow the business in the ways that we wanted to. But at the same time, we didn't really turn it into the proof of concept that we were thinking about. When we started, we said, DBT as a proof of concept has a bunch of things that we like. We like documentation, we like tests, we like the automation, we like the modular components, we like the collaboration, we love the lineage graphs, we love that we can just send this like HTML document to anybody and they'll be able to understand our transformations. But if you're moving as fast as possible, that's what you're seeing from the inside because you understand that vision, but people outside might not see that in the same way. They're only going to see what's in the repo and only see the things that you're sharing with them. And so that's why I want to talk about some of the opportunities that we had when we rolled out that initial prototype, because as you can see, just looking at one of our models folders, or the top models folder, this is from July, you can see that it's incredibly flat and it's kind of intimidating. It's a little bit overwhelming when you're giving that first impression to somebody of like, what is it that you're doing with DBT? Because I want to go into this repo, I'm going to try and like look through the different things. If I understand what the models are, I'll try and dive in there. But now I've just got like dozens of different models that I'm trying to understand, and it's not clear what the hierarchy of these things is. And I think if I go back to that, to Stephen Whitworth's talk from the last DBT meetup, he talked a lot about the importance of the first impression and the technical work that he was doing to make a good first impression at Monzo. And I think for us, this was sort of something that internally we were thinking like, oh, this is great, we're moving so fast. But externally, it might have been like, well, but like, I can't really understand this necessarily. I'm not dead sure how you structured this. I'm not. So anyway. So the second thing was the documentation. We knew that we were really excited about documentation as a concept, and we could generate the docs. But the way that we had set it up, initially, honestly, we were running it ourselves to do those transformations. Then finally we get it scheduled, but then there's a question of, okay, how do I host that documentation? Sure, I can host it the first time. It's very easy to host it once. But then every time I make a change to that code, I have to update that hosting. Now I need an engineer to help me do that. And I just told you when I showed you the side of the SEO team, it's just marketing teams and analysts. There's nobody who's engineering to be able to help us do this. But in our head, we already know. We know that documentation is the way forward. We know that DBT makes that super easy. And so in our head, still great. But in reality, when you look at this, it's like, okay, we haven't tagged these things necessarily. We don't have a description on here. We don't have descriptions on the columns. And so when somebody looks at this, they're still not really sure what they're looking at. but it almost takes like an outside eye to see that. And the third thing that you'll notice is, so I already mentioned that generating it super easy. You just run the command, but then once you host it, it comes with its own complications. I think the third thing was the tests. You can also see in this that we weren't running tests really because we were moving very fast. We got the things out the door. We knew that tests were in the future, and we didn't necessarily have to tell everybody like, hey, we're going to do testing, we're going to do all this stuff, and then show them all the tests because we know that, right? You guys know that. So, and this is really the fundamental difference that I want to talk about today, which is like, how does a newcomer see what you're doing versus how do you see what you're doing? And I think one of the questions that we would get a lot is like, why can't we use this old tool? Why can't we use Beetle? It does SQL, it does the YAML stuff. We can add in, like, it was in-house, so we could build in the dependency features. That was what we were excited about. We can add in documentation. Like, why do we need to move to this tool to be able to do those things? But internally, we're thinking, like, we're using the thing. Like, welcome to the year 3000. We've got DBT going. And that was kind of, it took some time to realize the disparity there. The second thing was, like, looking in this repo, if I'm familiar with what a Beetle repo looks like, and I understand that, I look in this one, I don't understand what it is. But at the same time, for us, we're like, this lets us do so much modular stuff. We can build so many things so quickly. Look at how great like this stuff is, and we're excited about it. We're servicing the need that the SEO team has to build all of their data with this new tool. So for us, it's a success. But when you look externally and you try to decide, do I want to move on to this? It's kind of questionable. And the third thing is, from externally, even though I can generate docs and then have it on my machine and send it to anybody who asks me, people aren't just going to ask me like, hey, can you send me this HTML file that you generate that's really pretty? There's no way that I am necessarily promoting that unless I'm actively promoting, this is where the documentation is, this is how you learn about this stuff. And also, additionally, making sure that people are actually using those data sets that you're building to understand the value of the additional stuff that you've built around it. Because if it's just that marketing team and the SEO team and one analyst, that's not really the expansion and scope that we need for people to feel like this is, we've sort of created an avalanche and people are going to move on to this. And then the fourth thing is, like, nobody was thinking about tests before we launched it. So when we launched it without tests, nobody was going to call us out on that. But that was a big thing of what we wanted to do this for. So we have to follow our own best practices to be able to get there, and that can be kind of a bitter pill to swallow. If you want to meet that deadline, it's like, okay, do I write the test, so on. And like the difference between these two things, if I can go back for a second, the difference between these two things isn't agreement on whether or not we should launch DBT. It's agreement on whether or not the thing that I'm asking for is valuable. The thing that I'm asking for is we should be doing documentation. We should be building reusable code that other people are collaborating on. We should be writing tests against all of these things. Those are fundamental cultural shifts between inside of our believers bubble and outside that we have to be clear about and be distinct about. And that's the point of this talk, is that we often use a new technology, not just DBT, but really any piece of technology, to be a catalyst for cultural change that we want to enact with the organization. I've done this a lot. I've done this with different tracking technologies. When I was starting to roll out Segment, I was like, this is going to be a catalyst for change. Like, this is going to be the way that we do all these things. But the tool is not really the change. These are two different things. There's a cultural change that I have to enact of, I have to have people expect that we have tests on these things. I have to expect documentation. That has to be like a thing that everyone is clamoring about. Otherwise, we're just moving to a new technology and we're not making the change that we wanted. So sometimes you'll roll out a technology and you'll look back at it and say, like, I have done the thing that I set out to do technically, but it's not necessarily the way that I wanted it to happen. And so this is the thing that I want to call out. If you're looking at a logo like this, it's easy to say like that this is the thing, like DBT will be the change that we do or that we have here, but that's not really the truth. What I want to call out is like you are the cultural change. And I'm going to reference Stephen's talk again. He talks about 80% of his time he was hoping to spend on communication, 20% of his time he was hoping to spend on technical work. And I think for me, I translate that as 80% of my time should be enacting the cultural change that I'm trying to enact, and then 20% of my time should be doing technical work to facilitate those things. And so when I said there's a way to not talk about DBT, this is what I want to talk about. The way that we were talking about it, that I was talking about it, was if we use DBT, we're going to get tests on everything. If we use DBT, we'll get documentation that everybody can read and use. But really, this is me projecting that the tool is a panacea that's going to fix a lot of my problems and my own workflow problems and things that I'm not doing well. And that I'm saying that my vision is the thing that it will bring. It's not actually, those two things are not actually related necessarily. This is one way that we could use DBT, but it's not necessarily the way that you have to. And I think the second way that I'm trying to start talking about this is to say, if we put tests on everything, we'll have confidence in our data. DBT makes that easier. DBT is not the thing that's doing it, it's just a facilitator to help us. So this is the bitter pill that we're swallowing. We have to put tests on everything. That's going to be somewhat time consuming, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. But we'll have confidence in our data. If I can sell that value, and I say this bitter pill is worth the value, then I can say, okay, the way that I'm going to make that easier is by creating this technical tool or all sorts of things around DBT to make that easy for you. So this is the thing that you're connecting there. You can take away DBT, you can take away whatever tool you're talking about. If you can connect the vision to the value that you're creating, then that is a reasonable way to be talking about this thing. Okay, so what I want to do now is kind of talk you through the ways that we've changed our approach since we made this realization and some of the things that we're doing to try and make this rollout a little bit more tangible for people. And hopefully if you've empathized with anything that I've said about the challenges that we faced or the things that we thought what we think are easy mistakes to make, then some of this will be relevant for the technical way that you can overcome some of these challenges and better associate your vision with the value. So the first one is that rather than running this ourselves, we've actually gone with a paid solution with, just a disclaimer there, a paid solution with DBT or with Fishtown Analytics called DBT Cloud. So this generates yet another beautiful looking UI that I can put in front of people that also provides scheduling. So this is an example of a run that we did where it gives me a really clear indicator of whether or not the run has succeeded. That's inclusive of any of the warning and error metrics that you would get. And I can have an analyst who has full access to this, who can go in and say, did my SEO data run today? Okay, yes it did. This is the time that it ran at. This is how long all of these models took to run. And if it's not running or something's going wrong, I can click rerun now and just rerun all of that. So rather than having the sort of a little bit more developer-centric Kubernetes hosting that we had, where you had to go in and force some cron job to run based on the command line, that's not something that all of my SEO team is going to be able to do. And if they could do it, great for them. But this is much easier and gives confidence to senior leadership that their analysts know what is going on with their data. So the second thing that we're doing, we do actually have an idle TV standby. Okay. So the second thing that we're doing is really doubling down on the documentation that we've been talking about and making ourselves follow that our own best practice to see if it works. Because what I want to know is, like, if I do this, is it so much of a pain that I don't want to do it? And if I don't want to do it, am I going to force somebody else to do it? This should help me find the happy medium between everything is documented and everything is beautiful and you've got a bunch of stuff around it and the thing that is actually reasonable for me. So what you can see here is that we do actually have descriptions, we have the details and the tags, we also have our columns documented, and that stuff gets written into BigQuery, which is really nice. Additionally, this is another part of DBT Cloud, which is that every time I run a run of DBT, I can generate new documentation so that if the GitHub repository updates at any point, then new docs are generated and I can share those again. And so, again, all hosted for me so I don't have to think about that nearly as hard as I was having to before. So the third thing is that you will actually see tests on this table. Very proud of that. We're trying to follow all of those best practices that we talked about so that once we do them, we can find the value in them and point to situations where having those tests or having that documentation was really useful for not just us, but for other people. And then we can say this is actually not a prototype, but a proof of concept. Because the concept that we wanted to prove was documentation is important. We wanted to prove that testing was important. We wanted to improve that better insight into these things and making it approachable was also important. And so if we have a prototype that does those things, I would call that a real proof of concept. So, in closing, talk about DBT like this. not like this. Okay. So, thank you. My name is Matthew Ferry. I'll be here all night and probably all week.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Matthew. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break. Go grab another drink if you want. Stretch your legs. And then we'll come back for Alan's talk in a second. And then we'll have a Q&A after that. Before you stand up, we have another round of applause for Matthew. Woo! people can slowly make their way to the seats in the front row. Still gonna shill for the value of a front row seat. Daniel's overpaid. He's overpaid for his ticket. He got the front row seat. I'm offering it for free to others as they slowly make their way. And I now realize this is like on a YouTube video forever. Someone in the year 3000, where RVU have many DBT projects deployed, listening to me just talk at the front. That's all we've got. All right then. Without too much further ado, we're going to get kicked off with the second talk. I haven't been told to forewarn you, but I will forewarn you that Alan is very pro audience engagement, like very pro audience engagement, and came up to ask me, how wide is the webcam? So how much can I do all this stuff? And I imagine we'll do so much more than I just did just there. Anyway, I'll let him get on with his talk. Can we have a round of applause for Alan Cruikshank from Tails?
Thank you, Dylan. As far as if people on the webcam can shout, I think I can get to about here, and I think I can get to about here. So I'm going to try not to wander too much further than that. Hi, I'm Alan. I'm from Tails. I'm going to try and make this a bit more interactive than some other talks I sometimes go to. So sorry in advance. First, how many people here have heard of Tails? Wow. How many people have heard of Tails and not just from the first DBT meetup? Okay. How many people have a dog? Good. You guys should definitely hear of Tails. More importantly about DBT. So I think there's probably about 3 categories of people here. So we've probably got some people who are looking at DBT but haven't actually dipped their toe in yet. We've got some people who are probably in proof of concept-y stages. You've started deploying, you've kind of using it a little bit, maybe in some teams, but you haven't rolled it out properly, or it's in some kind of sandbox. And we've probably got a third group of people who are using it. So how many people are in group 1? Nice. How many people are in group 2? They're all at the back. How many people are in group 3? And there are people from my team not putting their hand up in group 3. Oh dear, they're going to get picked on later. It's okay. I'm Alan. Tails, we make dog food, if nobody's come across us before. We are a subscription, online, tailor-made pet food. You come to our website, you tell us a load of details about your dog. We take that data and we use it to generate a blend of food specific to your dog, and then we ship it to you every month. We're just in the UK and France. Sorry, guys, in the US. I wanted to start out a little bit with where we are at on our DBT journey before I come back, and I'm going to touch on a lot of the themes we touched on in the first talk. So currently, we have been using DBT for about 19 months. I said 18 months on the first slide. Sorry. We have 476 models as of Monday. We've probably got some more by now. We have been through 2 data warehouses. We started with Redshift, and we've since used DBT to help us move from Redshift into Snowflake. We have 8 regular committers, and that's committers that are committing every week for the last 8 weeks. We have, on average, over the last 8 weeks, asterisk in the bottom corner if you want my stats, average 34 commits a week. Bear in mind, we currently deploy automatically, so each one of those commits has led to a new deploy of DBT. And we have hourly deploys, every hour, every day, every week, every year. That's currently where we're at. But why? So, and I think this is what I want to hopefully frame this whole talk about, and this is one of the parts of audience participation of, well, why did we come to DBT? What was the problem we were trying to solve? I'm going to start with what problems you guys are trying to solve. So, just shout them out. What are some of the kind of problems you're trying to solve with DBT? Don't be shy. What do you say? Order, bringing order to chaos. Yep. Any other shouts? Reuse. So we're trying to reuse bits of code that other people have built and not have duplication of logic in lots of different places. Anything else? Sorry? Oh, yes, to be more agile, to move faster. Yes, I'm going to come back to you. This is good. Anything else before I move on? Yes, and I'm also going to come back to that. This is good. We're doing well. I'm going to talk about the things you want to talk about. Data quality. Yes. So we came to DBT, and actually very fortuitously at a point in our journey when we were looking for something to help us centralize and democratize our business logic. Democratize is a word that gets overused a lot of time. Really, it just means more people can edit it. We had multiple different systems, all that had different bits of logic in different places, and it was becoming a headache to manage. And we wanted to take that logic and put it in one place so that everyone could do it, and there was one single version of the truth, that we reused the definitions. We didn't have, and for us, the things that matters are orders, dogs, pets, subscription lengths. We had one definition for whether a pet is active or not. That's kind of useful for a subscription business to do with pets. This is a slide I've changed since yesterday. So I went along to a meetup yesterday of chief data officers in London. And a lot of people in the data community in London at the moment are talking about using tools like this to get your data quality done, or like finish transformation, as though this is something that is done, that is static, that is not going to move. And I think the really great thing that DBT allows you to do, and that the paradigm shift that we kind of went through, is that it allows you, we're missing the animation. This should just say change here. To centralize and democratize change. We're not helping to democratize something that is static and is done. We're trying to help lots of people contribute to something that is moving, something that's changing. We talked about documentation in the last talk, about how your documentation is changed 10 times in a week, and you can't just have a static thing that's done. And I think that's definitely true for what we've done. So I'm going to talk about principles, I'm going to talk about productivity, I'm going to talk about reliability, and I'm going to talk about dogs. I have some dog pictures. I was joking to one of the guys earlier, the only reason people come and look at my talks is because I have dog pictures in them. But I think the first three here about principles, productivity, and reliability, and we touched on this in the previous talk, is that DBT is a tool that people use. Right? Yes, it's a technical tool that's going to help you get something done, but fundamentally, all of the things that are going to help you do DBT really well, and some of the things that have helped us do it really well, and some of the things that have helped us do it badly, are all about people. And that's what we're going to focus on. So we talked about DBT as a tool. The principles part of this are tools for you guys. We talked about communication in the last talk, and I think 80% of this is all communication and getting people in the right place. But if you're going to spend 80% of your time communicating about DBT, let's help give you guys some frameworks about how to communicate this, so you can spend that 80% of your time well and efficiently and reuse some code rather than making it up as you go along. So there are 4 principles I want to bring in. One, which is why we went to DBT in the first place, which is to centralize business logic in one place. Try as much as possible to have one definition for your important metrics and keep it in one place. The second one, about being really clear about what your model is for. Sometimes it is right to have 2 models that look like they're the same thing if they have 2 different purposes, and as long as you're clear what those purposes are. 3, test deliberately. This is one of the bits that I'm going to disagree with the past talk. Sorry, Matt. We have very few tests, but we have very few very deliberate tests in particular places when we know they matter. And I'll come on to what that means in a second. And 4, documentation, unsurprisingly. So the first one is around centralizing business logic. There's going to be some familiar faces here. We have some ETL tools. One of them is Fivetran, but we have some others. We have Airflow, which I guess, how many people in the room use Airflow in their business? Lots. That's about half of the room for people on the webcam. We have DBT, and we also use Tableau. This isn't a Tableau sales talk. And a lot of what we think about DBT when we bring it in is about the flow of data. Data flows this way. It comes in ETL tools or ELT tools. Some of it goes through Airflow, some of it doesn't. All of it goes through DBT, and it eventually ends up in Tableau. And one of the things we were thinking about when we're trying to centralize logic is there is logic that lives in all of these 4 steps. There's logic that lives in your ELT tools. Which tables, which sources of data are going to be brought in? There's logic that lives in whatever transformation tools or Airflow that you have. What transformations are being done? What do you choose to move around? Where do you choose to put it? There's obviously logic in DBT. If you use, who in the room uses Tableau and or Looker or similar, right? There are logic in all of those tools. So if you have a Tableau workbook, there will be a query in the background which might have some calculations in it. That is logic. And what we've thought over time is how do we manage the change of this logic? If you're a growing business, the logic of your business is changing every day and every year. And one of the things we've been starting to think about is this idea of logic flow. You can have logic in all of these, but where should it tend towards? And for us, DBT has been that centralizing point of where should the logic move to? That doesn't mean you can't have logic in a Tableau workbook. That doesn't mean you can't have logic in Airflow. That doesn't mean you can't have logic in whatever ELT tool you use. But over time, if it's important logic, it should gradually flow towards DBT so that is the one place that you have it. And I think we recognize that speed means sometimes you put logic in the wrong place and you accumulate some debt. And that's fine, as long as over time you clear up your debt. Also, if anyone has any questions as we go, just heckle. I'm fine with that. Otherwise, you can ask at the end as well. Who was at DBT Meetup 1 in Europe? Who recognizes this diagram? It should be the same group. So Colleen is one of the people on my team. And she talked a lot about what we use models for and how we think about the different levels of this. And broadly for us, we have 5 different schemas that we put our models in. We have a base one down here, which is where we bring everything in. We have a single point for every piece of data that comes in. I think that's probably quite normal for a lot of people. And we started out without this bit in the middle. And we started out without the one at the top. We started out with the bottom one and this core anonymous, which is we were trying to create a nice, sensible view that people who didn't have a lot of SQL knowledge could have a safe environment to SQL around in without getting lost and needing to worry about definitions. And that was what this was designed for. It's also called core anonymous because we strip out all of the personal data at that stage as well so that we don't, yes? Fields. Some fields, we work out which fields they are, and there's one that isn't on here, which is at the side, where we just materialize those fields. But wait, animation. We have some access control here. I'm going to come back to the access control in a second. So we make sure that anything that's in this core view is non-personal data. We can show it to basically anyone we want to, and people can SQL around in it to their heart's content. We then realized that over time, there was a lot of logic in our Tableau workbooks that we needed to put somewhere sensible because it was hard to maintain in Tableau workbooks, and we put that in our reporting view on the top. We then realized that there was there's this kind of layer where we do lots of hard maths in the third one, in this transform one, and that we were getting a bit confused with what is like. Take, for example, we had an idea of an order. And there's one model which we have which is defining, well, when did the order happen? What is it? How big is it? And then there's some other models that are defining, well, what is its relation to other things? Is it someone's first order, third order, fifth order? And some of that needed to happen really early in the process, and some of it could happen late. And this def layer has been introduced relatively recently to provide that starting point for all of our entities. I could talk for hours about this, but the important bit here is this access control layer. And we talked a little bit before about how to introduce new people to DBT. And for us, we're about a 170-person company, and I think about 10 people have heard the words DBT, the letters DBT. All they see is this. They see the top half of this. They see the effect of DBT. They understand the value of it because they can see these nice, clean views of all the data we have about a pet or an order, but they don't need to worry about the bottom bit until they do. And then we introduce it gradually. Principle number 3, testing deliberately. How many people in the room write SQL on a daily basis? Yeah, we go. What is your most common... Actually, no, I'm going to ask that question in a second. The way we think about tests... The first most likely thing we think to go wrong is joins go wrong. What happens if join goes wrong? Well, you're going to do it with more rows. So we use unique tests a lot. On key models, we say, is the ID still unique? Because if the ID is still unique, your join probably is fine. This is good. Secondly, dependencies and references go wrong. So the model, I'm not going to go back to my pyramid on the previous slide. The reason that we have the pyramid is so that everything depends in the right direction. And we had a problem when we reached about 150, 200 models where we were always getting cyclical references in because someone was like, oh, well, I want this definition for over here, but that definition depends on this definition over here. And we were ending up in these never-ending cycles. And so we had to come up with some rules. And I think it's one of the meta themes I guess we're talking about here is these. We didn't make up all these rules when we first brought in DBT. We've made up the stuff as we go along to solve problems. And this one came up, the testing stuff came up because we had data quality issues. The pyramid came up before because we sat around and we went, guys, we're getting loads of circular references. How are we going to deal with this? And these tools work for us. Feel free to steal them. If they don't work for you, make up some new ones. That's also cool. So tests. We realized that we were having circular references. And so one of the things we've brought in is some tests which check the dependencies of those models and make sure they only depend on models they're allowed to depend on. If you're also using Snowflake, we've open sourced the plugin. The link is at the bottom. If you can't read the text, if you go to the tails.com GitHub account, you'll find it. It's one of our only open source repos. And we've got a blog post on how to use it. The third thing, and I think this is what a lot of people worry about in testing, is raw data goes missing. We had a long think about this, and to some extent, if the raw data's gone missing, making your DBT fail is almost bad, because then you won't know if the problem's getting worse, because you won't be getting new versions of the data for you to check whether the problem's getting worse. We do a few tests around this, but very, very, very few. And lastly, the maths goes wrong. And this is actually the least likely of all of our tests. And we have a couple of tests around totals of key metrics. We have a couple of tests that check our historic revenue against a CSV file of what our historic revenue was monthly last year. And if that's all good, everything else is probably good. And I've been hinting along the way that this is increasing likeness. We have many more of these. This is the most likely problem to happen, that our joins have gone wrong. And so we have many more tests about this. And we have very few tests about the maths going wrong because it's much less likely to happen. My question before, what is the most likely problem with your SQL that is not on this diagram? Don't be afraid. Don't be embarrassed. It's the same answer for all of us. It's a syntax error. And one of the beautiful things about DBT is it allows us to test that by the virtue of does DBT run? Does it build? Does it actually work? We'll make sure that your syntax error is right, and that is the most common error we have in our DBT base. And I'm going to see if the guys at the back, Alex, Mark, are you nodding or shaking your head? Yeah, they're nodding. This is the most likely error you're going to have, and so work out how to protect yourselves against that rather than the maths going wrong, because that's going to happen a lot less often. Principle number 4, documentation. Documentation belongs to everyone. We've talked about the inbuilt documentation for DBT, so that's this one in the middle. We have actually, similar to Matt talking about before, we have a link to the most recent version of that that anyone can go access, but I think it's probably the least used of our documentation. The most used, I suspect, is this inline documentation. Literally just comments next to fields. And if you think about where your analysts or whoever is going to spend most of their time with DBT spends most of their time, they don't spend their time in the documentation. They spend their time in the models. So put the documentation where the people are, which is in the models. And one of the things we've been trying to do is in all of our base models, if it matters where the data comes from, put that documentation next to the field, because that's where the person's going to find it that needs to know that information. That may be different for your business, but think about the principle of where it is. The other side of this is that the documentation belongs to everyone. It's not the job of the manager, or it's not my job, or it's not anyone. It's all of our jobs, because it's something that helps all of us. And so one of the things we've been trying to do is encourage people as early as possible in their career at Tails to contribute not just to the models themselves, but to the documentation, and get people into the habit of that early. That's it for principles so far. Anybody want to heckle, or shall I move on? Oh, got some heckling from the back. Yes. I'll repeat the question, but... Oh, catchbox. Ooh. No. Just shout the question out. I'll repeat the question.
So the question is, what additional monitoring do you have if you're not running tests on different things? And also, what happens when your tests fail?
Excellent. You have segued perfectly onto my next slide. So if I don't answer the question in 2 slides' time, then wave at me. I'm now going to talk about productivity. We mentioned earlier at the beginning of this talk that DBT is a tool for people. This is a tool about collaboration. If you were a one-person team, you do not need DBT. You can just write the models yourself and deploy them however. The value in DBT is that it's collaborative. That's why the Git integration is so important. And so think about if you've got a lot of people in there, how do you help make those people's lives easier? So I'm going to give you an example of someone on our team. This is Bernie. He is literally this is our lead data scientist dog, Bernie. He is on team data. He likes insights. He does not speak Python. He doesn't like waiting, and he is a good boy. He's also the reason that one of the people on my team isn't here tonight because she couldn't get a dog sitter. So the kind of daily workflow, how are the people who are using DBT day in, day out, what does their workflow look like? And this is what it looks like for us, and I'm going to call out some of the issues along the way. So you have a business problem. Someone says, hey, France is broken, or I don't understand why this thing has gone up. They're going to go and query some models. They're going to go and do some analysis, write some SQL, see if they can find an answer. They're probably going to then go, ugh, the field I need isn't there, or it's only in this other model that I need, and they're going to need to edit it. And they're going to edit the DBT models, they're going to save it, and they're going to test their edits locally because they're a great person like that, aren't we? But then they're going to find, what, you mean test it live? Like on the live, but then if I break it, then I'm going to break all of the models that everyone's querying at the moment. So no, we have sandboxed environments for each user, and I think if you don't, one of the first things I suggest anyone does when they start using DBT is make sure everyone on your team has credentials that point to a different schema in your data warehouse so they can all deploy in their own schema. Great. So we did that. Wait, no. The last time they tried to test their models was 5 commits ago, and someone else has committed a model that this one depends on, and so they need to make sure that their models are up to date. One of the things that, and we actually didn't have this for almost a year of using DBT until it got such a bad problem. And I'll get onto this in more detail in a second, but we ended up building a little microservice to manage how DBT goes. And if anyone's interested in doing that, grab me afterwards. I can talk you through exactly how we did it. But it allows people to go into the Linux space and say, hey, here's my credentials. I want you to build the most recent version of DBT in my schema so that when I come back to it after I've made a cup of tea or been to a meeting and I've closed my laptop doesn't need to be open. I can come back and I have some models to actually test on. Wait, no, there's another problem, but I'm on a Windows laptop and my Python environment's messed up. So we also, and I think this comes back to kind of bringing software development practices into your analytics team. We have like run scripts, and we've Dockerized this so that it's environment independent and it can run on any platform. Okay, so they've tested it locally, they're happy, or maybe they haven't. They've committed it to a branch, and then they want to test it remotely, and we use the same service that we talked about before, to test it again, and we've set that up so it works. Then they commit to master, or maybe they don't put it on a branch, and they just commit straight to the master branch because they're being lazy. And then it tests. So we talked about why a DBT test is important, and I think they really come into their fore, and we kind of touched on this a little bit in the previous talk, when you can use it to continuously deploy analytical changes and changes to your models. And so one of the things that our system does at the moment is it will take any commit and start testing that commit on its own and check whether it worked. Did it pass the test? Did it successfully build? If it does, it flags it as great. This is good. And then that one gets deployed straight away to our live models, and then it recurs hourly. So every hour, we're building the most recent successful version, and as soon as someone's committed another one that passed the tests, that one takes its place, and that one will every hour go through this process of being built. In the early days, we did not have all of this. I think we had probably like everything on the bottom row here, and we've kind of hodgepodged this together over several months of gradually extending it. I think now DBT Cloud's in a much better place than 19 months ago, so I'd definitely check that out. But also, a lot of this stuff isn't rocket science. And I think if you think how much time your software team, if you have a software team in your business, spends doing DevOps on their stuff, take 10% of that time and ask them to do some DevOps for your analytics team, and it will be time well spent. And I think some of the principles that are behind this likewise comes back to the people side of it. Let your analysts be analysts, not software developers. Think about DevOps with data. Your analysts probably won't think about DevOps because they don't know what DevOps is. So script repetitive tasks, help save their time. They will love you for it. Abstract away the environment. most of your team doesn't need to know whether you're running DBT 1.14.0 or 1.14.1. It's just not important. What they do need to know is whether their build works and whether the code and the logic they're putting in there is good. Likewise, tests are there to help you move faster. They should give you confidence to take bigger steps, to try more adventurous things, because you know if you step wrong, the test will fail and it won't go live and you won't break everyone's stuff and someone won't come screaming at you because their report doesn't work. And tests are there as a safety net, not as a restrictive thing. And if you have loads of tests and they're becoming restrictive, get rid of them, right? They should be there to help you move faster. And delays break flow. Think about in all of these processes how you can reduce the amount of time it takes for something to get live and be done. And the quicker things can get out, the quicker you can... who's come across the concept of the OODA loop? It's one of my new favorites. Nice. Yeah, exactly. You know why? It's a concept from military science developed by a guy called John Boyd, which is a loop from orient, observe, orient, decide, act, and round and round. And it came from fighter plane design where they realized that there was a slower plane that was beating all of the faster planes, and it was because it was more maneuverable. And the people in these planes could orient, decide, and act quicker than the faster planes, and so they were winning. And I think about how you can help anyone on your team make a decision and see the effects of that decision quicker so they can make another decision and they can go back and they can reiterate quicker and quicker and quicker. Finally, reliability, which isn't about no reliability, it's about monitoring, alerting, and metrics. So reliability is a thing about software. Monitoring, alerting, and metrics are how you help your people help your software be reliable. So we have a dashboard, right? We're a data team. Have a dashboard for your data, which says, look, here's a load of people deploying stuff. These are all failing. They're yellow. And anyone on the team can go in and find out why their deployment is failing. But in the meantime, the most live one is still going. They can also go in and look at the logs and say, okay, well, I can see any line that's got the words fail in it in capital letters is highlighted nice and red. So they're easy to find when you're scrolling through 3 pages of logs. Just to say, back to that principle before, how do you save people time and help them get to the answers they need quicker so they can make changes? And when the live one fails, there's a Slack alert in our main team channel, right where everyone's having the conversation about whether it's time to go for lunch, so that everybody knows that the real one is failing and someone needs to do about it. And lastly, we have a legit dashboard where we track some metrics about this. Can anyone actually read the numbers? I'm assuming not. You can just see some pretty pictures, right? Right. Briefly, let me talk you through what this is for. I'm going to start. The webcam won't see me. So start on the right. There's a graph here that has the build time to every individual model. You can see the big green line, which went up 2 weeks ago. Someone introduced a new model. It was very computationally intensive. It took ages to build, and then we optimized it, and it went down. And people can see the results of the work they do there. Likewise, you can see in the middle, this middle gray line is about the total time for the build itself. How long is that taking? Is that going up or is that going down? And giving people the ability to see that and track it, because turns out your analysts love data. So give them data on how productive they're being, and they'll do something about it. And finally, this one in the bottom left is a more in-depth version of the one on the right to really flag up, okay, we have 3 models here which are deep red and take a lot of time to build, and maybe we should do something about them. Recap. So we've been talking about principles. What are the principles to help your people be productive with DBT? We've talked about productivity. How do you help your people be productive with the DBT they're doing, and so that they adopt it quicker? Ooh, no, spoilers. We talked about reliability. We talked about dogs. All of this is about people. This is what I encourage anyone who's thinking about bringing DBT in, and I guess this is to some extent the moral of the previous talk as well. When you're thinking about bringing in DBT or you're thinking about getting it out, the tool is great, the tool is cool, but the tool is just a tool. And think about how to help the people use the tool well. Finally, this is my obligatory hiring slide. If you want to change the world of pet food for good, if you want to work with a mature DBT deployment and you like dogs, we are hiring. This is us. This dog isn't actually one of our actual dogs. We realized on our rebrand we needed to get some more photogenic dogs. But I have a phone full of pictures of dogs, actual office dogs. I think we've got about 10 dogs in the office every day. So, yeah, that's it.
Cool. Another round of applause for Alan. I'm going to show my nerdiness for a second. If anyone's interested in OODA loops, there's a really good episode of the Invest Like the Best podcast by Patrick O'Shaughnessy, where they do a really deep dive into like what bits of an OODA loop are really important for teams to like understand. And if you have like a couple hours on a Saturday afternoon, I'd highly recommend it. Cool. We are going to do a bit of a Q&A now. So we've got a couple of these. That one definitely works. This one we're going to get working. And we're going to ask Matthew to come back up. And we're not going to do an Alan because all three of us need to stand here so that we're in camera. And so you're going to plant both your feet and keep talking into that. And if you are on the Slack channel, ask away. We will try to field some of those too. But in the meantime, questions.
Can you? There we go. This one's got room shape. Oh, no. No. This one's for Alan. So you mentioned like right at the beginning that you have a warehouse that used to be Redshift that's now Snowflake.
Yes.
What attracted you to Snowflake, and was it DBT specific or something else?
Ooh, that's a good question. Was it something DBT specific? No. Not really. Actually, when we first moved to Snowflake, it was harder to move DBT over because there were, as much as Snowflake has a lot of upsides, there are some functions missing, notably Boolean aggregate functions, which we used a lot of. And so that got a bit harder to move it over. We moved over for scaling reasons. So we, I guess as a business, we're currently growing like 50, 60, 70% year on year. And the data volumes are doing more than that because we're doing more stuff with more customers. And we were also growing storage much quicker than we were growing compute. I made a forecast one day and I realized how expensive Redshift was going to be if our data volumes kept growing at the storage speed they were. And decided we probably needed to switch. We went around looking around, and the segregation of compute and storage was really this is turning into a Snowflake sales chat. But that's really why we did it. If we wanted more compute, you get some more compute. You don't need it, you turn it off again. If anyone's thinking of migrating from Redshift to Snowflake with a DBT deployment, we wrote an internal README of all the differences in the syntax. So and it's not long, and none of them are really big and meaningful, but they're all really tedious and slightly annoying. Like how to deal with timestamps is different, and how to deal with booleans is different, and you can't say is not true. You just have to say not thing. It's all stuff like that. But if null, yeah. But if you are doing it, give me a shout, and I'll share that with you.
Just follow up. Did you try Spectrum before you moved?
No. Should we?
Yeah, it separates storage and compute.
Dylan's shaking his head, but let's grab a beer afterwards. Do you want to share? Throw the thing.
I have one question, which is also for you, unfortunately. In that lovely pyramid, that you have very pretty pyramids, and your
it's a Google
presentation was
Slides
lovely.
built-in visualization.
Oh, who knew? Okay.
Fun fact.
You talk about like the bottom layers of view, and then the middle layers tables, and then all the ones above that as far as I could tell, were views, and I'd be really interested in knowing like how you got to that, whether that reflects reality now, and how you got to that as the setup that you decided to go for.
That's a pretty story that is mostly true, but not entirely true. I think the way there's a balance to, on one side, if the more stuff that's tables, the quicker it is to query. The more stuff that's view, the quicker it is to build. And so whenever our build times get really, really long, that OODA loop we talked before gets longer and slower, and it's slower to see the results of your work. So if your build times, for example, are reaching an hour, the minimum time for you putting a new field in to being able to use it is an hour. And that really slows you down. And so what we were trying to do is reduce that. At the same time, if you have a table which is used by a lot of people, which has loads of window functions in it and is about 6 views deep before it gets to anything concrete, then that's going to be really slow, and it's also not going to work. And I think the view table thing there, I guess to quote Pirates of the Caribbean, be more guidelines, came from realizing that def layer was the first layer where we basically had the granularity we were going to have for the rest of the tree, and it was a really good place to first materialize. We also have that transform layer where we do expensive computation is mostly tables. Where it doesn't need to be is mostly views, and some of our very heavily used top layer models are also tables. Just for speed. I haven't yet come up with a good rule of thumb for what should be a table and what should be a view. I'm trying to see where Mark is. Where's Mark? Oh, there you are. I think Mark's on the team. Everyone wave at him. You can go talk to him about what it's like to work at Tails if you want to come and work at Tails. I think we talk quite a lot within the team about whether things should be views or tables.
What about materialized views?
Like Snowflake materialized views?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't actually know how to. We just use the materialized config in DBT. Just say materialize as table.
Yeah, I wonder if DBT lets you do that. Use the materialized view portion.
I don't know.
Snowflake.
I've never tried. The downside is Snowflake charges you extra for doing that. You have to be on one of their more advanced plans for them to let you do that. And I don't think we bought that feature because we were being cheap.
So you mentioned you have how many analysts in the team, or doing commits?
We have 8 people regularly committing.
Okay. How do you ensure that the SQL style is consistent? Do you put any rule, or do you leave them to?
Oh, we don't. That's what we use the tests for. So if someone gets in there first, great, their build will go out. And then the other person will just have to deal with it. If 2 people also have failing builds at the same time, they all sit next to each other. And what's nice, and I think this is more kind of organizational design, but like make sure you've got your team close if you can, because then they could just shout and be like, hey, wait, I made a change and it was working and now it's not working. Has anyone else been in there? And someone else will go, yeah, I made another change. It's just gone live. And then they'll be like, why didn't you tell me you were working on the same model as me? And then they'll usually sort it out. But I think I don't know, I'll see if the guys nod or shake that. No, Mark's shaking his head. That doesn't really work. But it's probably a good question to ask Mark over a beer about whether that works or not.
So I read your question a little bit differently. Were you also asking about SQL style, as in like the formatting and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, like to ensure that all analysts can understand the models and not just create silos, so that only one analyst can actually work on that understanding completely.
Yeah. So that's a good point for us. I'll pass it back to you. But we also had a sort of situation with this. So as part of the cultural change that I was talking about, we found that Fishtown Analytics actually has a lot of documentation from using DBT about how to create, for example, a Git guide or a SQL style guide. So both of those things are really useful, and they're something that we're kind of looking at to them to say, okay, what is the work that's already been done in this space? Like, for example, their Git guide says, like, this is what you should put on a commit message, and this is what you should put in the details of a pull request. This is how long it should take to before you can merge it, that sort of stuff. Like, just having that consistency, it feels good as an analyst. You feel like smarter. You feel like you learned something. And so in the same way, if you look at their SQL style guides, it's like, oh, okay, certain things that I may agree with, I may disagree with, we may add things on top of it, like do I put commas after or potentially contentiously before the columns? So like things like that, there's a rumbling in the room. So like stuff like that, you can decide as a group and then codify it and kind of build on the platform that's already been created by these other teams.
One thing I would say, so a couple of people I work with are in the room, and I started working with them about 6 months ago, and they used all caps, and I immediately came in and shat on that, which was a mistake, because there was a thing that I think did the rounds in the DBT Slack a while ago, which was like someone did a meta-analysis of all of the most successful GitHub projects that involve a huge amount of SQL, and they had a look at like which ones use all caps, which ones use all underscore, which ones use a mix, and actually the ones that used a mix were by far the most successful. And so like that's in a very specific environment, and that's open source, and there's probably a whole bunch of reasons for that, and it shouldn't necessarily be what your organization does. But I think there's like we don't get to do that much where there's like a huge amount of like wide scale research, because we all live behind closed doors and all pay for like private GitHub repos. But they found that a mix did that, though you had to keep the same one within a model, which is probably something that you're about to not to. But like, so if you start in a single file, it's underscore like lowercase or uppercase. Stick to that.
We don't enforce a style guide. I would love to. I think we have conversations about SQL readability. I think if someone's written something, in fact, I can talk about it now because he's left the team. There was one guy in particular who wrote some really, really convoluted SQL, and it causes headaches, right? It makes it harder for other people to read, and I think it's important as a team to be able to talk about that and say, Kevin, I'm not going to say his actual name, but your SQL's a mess. Can you tidy it up? Because it matters. I looked around for a way to automate this. I've been looking for a good SQL linter for a while, not found one, to the point where I've actually started building one. It's one of these projects that I don't get enough time to spend on. It's half done. It's on the DBT Slack community. If you look for SQL Fluff, it's there. SQL Fluff is in open beta. It doesn't do very much at the moment. Don't try it. Don't bother. It's way, way, way from done. But there's a space out there for a good SQL linter at the moment. If we could find one, I would love to use it, because I totally agree with what everyone said about consistent styling. I don't think it matters what your styling is. What it matters is so that everyone else can understand it and read it.
And I think one of the things about like the like speed of deployment and speed of stuff is like if you write Python and you use something like Black, it actually doesn't matter what your Python looks like, because you click save and it's immediately going to get formatted into whatever the hell, like, it is lazy, but it allows like people to develop very quickly and save and know that like it's in a standard format. I think like SQL analytics generally is like lagged behind software engineering. I think we're all in this room because we feel like that's maybe catching up or should catch up. And I'd hope in time that Alan will finish his project.
Or someone else will get there before me. But I think in 10 years, if there isn't a good SQL linter, I would be very surprised. I'd almost go to the stage where I suspect someone would release a paid-for one that people will pay for, because if I assume DBT goes the way that it will, and it's going to take off more and people start using it, if you're like a massive enterprise using DBT, you're gonna need some kind of automated linting, and you would pay good money for it.
So USwitch and RVU are big. It's like a big Go shop. So I don't know a lot about Go, so I apologize if I get this wrong. But I'm pretty sure there's a saying that's like everybody hates Go formatting, but everybody loves Go Formatter. There's like a package that formats it automatically when you save it. Yeah, there's somebody nodding. I've nailed it. That's my developer cred for the night. So what I thought about for a little bit was like, okay, we use BigQuery. BigQuery does have a button where you can click Format Query, and it will format the query into a specific like structure. It is awful. It is disgusting. It is unreadable. I hate it. But I do think about it sometimes. Like, maybe we should just use that, and maybe I would get used to it. But I hate it.
I've got a question for you, which is, you talked a lot about like the journey you've been on and the things that you've learned. What are the next steps for that? What does like DBT at RVU look like tomorrow, and what do you hope it looks like in 3 to 6 months?
Yeah, so looking at it tomorrow, we're trying to pretty much train all of our SEO team on like not just the analysts but the marketers as well. Of like, let's help you understand this. Like, because if people who have very little SQL knowledge can get into this and understand it and learn these things, one, they're going to feel like badasses. Two, they're also going to prove that this is something that we can share among people. And then once we get to the point where we feel really confident in this proof of concept, we can start moving to other projects. So there's plenty of other projects that we're interested in taking on. And our sort of budding data team is going to continue to promote this tool where it makes sense. And so that's sort of the long-term vision, is that it will go where we go, and hopefully it will go beyond where we go.
Going to get another question from the audience while I ask you to type your password in. Anyone in the audience?
Yes, I know it's not long enough. I'm sorry.
Any other questions?
Oh, there you go.
I got one, but it's not actually related to DBT. What do you do? Sorry. What do you do actually as a data product manager? I think it's a quite new role.
Yeah, so this is a good question. It's a new role for me as well. So I moved into this role about a month ago. Prior to that, I was just like data guy. And there was like, this is true, there was a video at an all-company meeting where they went around and asked people, what does Matt Ferry do? And people could not answer. And that was funny for the first 3 times. And then I was like, oh no, am I going to be fired for this? So now sort of the role of data product manager was actually the brainchild of Francisco. He found an article that talked about data product managers, and essentially the idea was that data is like any other product that you're building, that you have users that are internal to your business, and you need to figure out what they need and then translate those needs into things that you can build. So some kind of infrastructure, some kind of technical work needs to be done to facilitate the things that people want, but also there's probably a lot of like educational work that needs to be done, and that can also be considered as part of your product suite. So what I'm doing is a lot of discovery with sitting down with teams. I mean, it's still pretty early, so I've sat down with a lot of teams to figure out what their pain points are, and then try to find themes between those things, and then say, okay, between those 5 teams that I talked to you about, this is the place that I think we could best figure out how to reduce the latency of our data, or this is the place that I think we could best develop good monitoring. And then I'm kind of prioritizing the work of an engineering team, which is also just me at this point. So to build different platforms that service those needs.
Cool, thanks.
One thing I'd say is, like, particularly if I think you use self-service tools, I think there's been a change over the past few years of like what people in data do, and DBT feeds into a lot of that. Speaking to someone in London a couple of weeks ago who has just rolled out Looker, and they have hired someone with like possibly not exactly the same title, but that title, and whose like responsibility was this. And what they did was they hired a like data literate teacher. Like, his literally was a guy whose job before that was to teach people, because a ton of what he was going to do was just like go out and tell people, like evangelize for this tool, teach people how to use this tool. And I imagine if you can like do that with 8-year-olds, you're like way overqualified to do it in like with me. Any other questions? Right at the back, Chuck. It's a really soft. There you go.
What tool are you giving the wider business to query Snowflake?
Most of the business interact with it through Tableau. Well, if I think we're 170 people, we have currently 110-ish people active on Tableau. Well, 110 people who have active licenses on Tableau, of which I think about 70 use it regularly. There's a subset of people, and I guess as a data function, we have 10-ish people. There's a pool of about another, and the people within the data team will be querying it from all kinds of things using their SQL client of choice. We've got a group of people who sit outside the data team who have some SQL skills, and I think we probably don't serve them very well at the moment. What we're working out at the moment is what level of support they need, but broadly, just a SQL client, like a desktop SQL client. I think there's space for like a browser-based query sharing collaboration platformy thing. I haven't found a good one that I like that's cheap yet. So I think that's kind of where we're at the moment.
Just gonna give a gentle recommendation there, and it's like not fully formed, but there's a tool called PopSQL, which we've used a bit, which is like Google Drive for SQL queries, and it's built by a fellow Canadian, so I'm just like repping that but it's like not fully there yet, and I hope he wouldn't mind me saying that it's not fully there, but they've just gone through YC, and I'm hopeful that that might be the next thing to do that.
Look forward to it, guys.
Any last questions? Any final questions?
So I heckled you and asked for the catch box and distracted a lot of people earlier to ask this question. I'm going to ask it again now. So you said that you test very deliberately. That makes a lot of sense. I took a lot of photos of your slides, even though I have access to them. And I think the question that I have is, there's still things that are not like errors necessarily in there, or they might be errors in a different way that you're not testing. And I'm just curious, what is the additional way that you're kind of propagating, or that you're monitoring those things? Like, what do you have in addition to DBT? Because that's what we're trying to figure out, is like DBT is one solution for that, but what else do I need to be looking at?
We're also trying to figure that out, honestly. I think the tool we use at the moment is people. If we have enough eyeballs looking at enough graphs, if it looks weird, someone says it looks weird. In fact, me and Mark had a conversation today about how to solve this exact problem. I think the attempts we've had at the moment, we have a wall next to our team called the Wall of Debt, covered in post-it notes about bits of our data that don't really work very well, or a bit sketchy, or a metric that someone thinks is a little bit flaky, or might be defined in two different places and isn't quite right. If they were very high visibility metrics or high visibility pieces of data, we would have fixed them already, but they're kind of in the background and no one's really noticed yet, and they're kind of the edge data. What we don't have yet is a good way of dealing with that. Ask me in 6 months and I'll have a better answer, but at the moment it's people based.
So if you use Looker, which is like lots of people in the room, but probably maybe a majority, close to majority. They're about to release something called something like data tests, or something really like unit tests, or it's something very standard like that, which will let you basically do what you can do in DBT and Looker. So you can like generate a query, go into Explorer, generate a query, and set what your expectation is of that. And so I know for like people who use Looker, that's one thing that I, with people, am thinking about. What that doesn't let you do en masse, which I think is like a big issue when you use DB, or like any warehouse management system, like modeling tool plus a BI tool on top, is you get no feedback loop at the moment. If like I go and change the name of a column, like I don't get on my DBT PR that I've broken a Tableau dashboard. And if you use Looker, you may not have broken any dashboard. You may have broken a field that no one uses, and a week and a half later, somebody's going to go in, try to query that, get an error, and like be shitty with you, and you'll have like lost the trust that you've built with that person. And so this is like leading up to me telling people about a thing I've built. But
subtle.
Yeah, it's good. I think it's a thing that a lot of people in the DBT community have, and hopefully very soon, not just me, but like someone else in particular has done a lot of work on this, and we hope to provide something that might do something like that.
I think the other thing that's worth thinking about, and it comes back to the principles thing we had a little bit on our slide, of there's a spectrum of make sure nothing is wrong, but move kind of slowly because you've got tons and tons of tests, and move really quick, but occasionally break stuff. And break it in a way that you might not immediately know that you've broken it, because you might have to wait a week for someone to shout at you from down the road. And I think depending on what kind of organization you are, the right point along that spectrum is going to be different. I think the important thing is to make the choice consciously as to where you want to be, and then be able to justify it. And I think we as a team have intentionally said that we want to be able to move quickly. We know the bits of our data that are critical, and we have tests around that, and the non-critical bits, we would rather move quicker, innovate faster, and occasionally piss someone off because it broke for a day, than be able to guarantee that it never broke, but have to deal with the extra infrastructure around testing it to make sure it never did break. I've got a question at the back.
One last question.
Someone throw the brick.
So for me, I guess the scariest kind of error is one where you've got a test and the test passes, but actually the number's wrong. And for me, in that process, the step that seemed like it was missing is a review from someone else. Have you tried to introduce any kind of process like that where like a pull request gets reviewed before it gets merged and deployed, or anything
Have
like
we
that?
tried?
Yep.
Yes. Has it been very successful? No. I think at the moment we operate kind of on trust, where I think we trust the team to know whether they're on something that's really critical or not. And I guess implicitly, if you're working on something that you think is really sensitive or really critical, get someone else to look at it. I think if we were a much bigger team, we probably would have to. I could see a world where options I've considered are like locking the master branch and you can only pull request to it, and do a very Git style pull request, reviewers, approvers, all that jazz. I think for the size we're at, that's overkill, but I'd consider it. You could have, daily review sessions where if you want to push something new, you have to come in and someone has to look over your shoulder. But I think with all of this, we talked a little bit about it before. There's this, because with DBT you can test so much stuff. There's I should put tests on everything, and it's like, consider the downside of that. Consider what cost. If even if it's just the maintenance cost of those tests. So, give you an example. We have one of our tests. We check the number of new pets we thought we had in every previous month. We have a CSV file, adds up months, and it says in July 2014, we had only just launched and we had 1,062 pets that signed up in that month. And if anytime DBT runs and the answer to the question of how many pets we had signing up in that month is any different from that number, the build will fail and it will say, no, this isn't going out, the data's wrong, it's not going out, leave the old version. We also occasionally have people who go back into the system and change the numbers because there was an error, or we changed the definition of what a sign up is, or some weird edge case that someone has changed the number, and instead of in 2 years ago in data that shouldn't be changing, it's no longer 1063, it's 1062. And at that point it's do we want to spend loads and loads of time digging into why that is, or do we just update the test to say it's supposed to be 162, that's fine, don't worry about it. And that is in one of our top line business metrics, tiny changes, but that might make you fail the tests. And every time you put a test in, you are gonna introduce some burden of maintaining that test, and you should do that consciously, because if you don't need the test, it's gonna waste time, and it's not gonna give you an extra value.
I think I agree with that principle. I'm just more thinking in terms of having more sets of eyes on each change that sort of ends up in your report. So I'm wondering if people have had success with that kind of process in a team that maybe isn't used to software engineering type processes. So for example, in a marketing team where maybe not everyone's used to Git and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think the advantage we've got at the moment is our analytics function is, I guess, centralized. We don't have distributed analysts, I guess, in the same way you guys do. It's one central team that supports everyone. And so I think they all talk to each other. I'm looking at them now. They all talk to each other. And it's we can operate on that trust model where someone can be like, oh hey, can you come and look and just check that this thing I've not done. I guess we also use Slack. Like one of the guys on the team slacked me earlier in the week and was like, look, I've made a change to this model. It's gone live, but before I start building loads of stuff on it, can you just have a look at it and check that it looks sensible? Beyond that, we don't have any more process beyond that. But it kind of, for now, it kind of works. I think if we get a lot bigger, we might have to have a bit more process. But I think it's a trade-off we know at the moment. We know we're going to occasionally get some stuff that goes through that isn't right. And I guess we are consciously okay with the choice that means.
Cool. I'm going to finish us off there. Can we have another round of applause for our two speakers? I think we're good in this room till 9 p.m., which is like a half hour away. So have some more DBT cookies, which if you haven't seen are like the most amazing thing in the world and set the bar very high for people who host subsequent meetups to this. If you're watching this on YouTube and you're showing up to a DBT meetup and there isn't a cookie with the DBT logo on it, like, is it worth being there? Really? Cool. And then the final bit for me is, this is the third one of these that we've done since, I guess, June, this summer. Some people here know that I'm moving to Canada in 10 days. And so what I wanted to say was just like, thank you to all of you and to the hosts, to people from Tails, from Growth Street, from Monzo, from Simply Business, from RVU, from everywhere else. In case I've forgotten anyone, like, I think one of the best things about DBT is the community. And people talk about competitors and they don't have the community, and I think that's one of the reasons that this tool will probably do very well, is that like it has everyone here and you show up on a Thursday night, we have people give a talk. And so from me, it was just like a thank you to all of you, and to say that these will continue and I will find a way to make sure that they keep going. But that was it. Cool. Have a good evening, everyone.